19. The mistake Karenina had made when preparing to see his wife, he had not considered the possibility either of her repentance being real or of her recovery, faced him in all its significance 2 months after his return from Moscow. But this mistake was not entirely caused by his omitting to consider that contingency, but also by the fact that, up to the day when he was face to face with his dying wife, he had not known his own heart. By his 6th wife's bedside, he had for the first time in his life given rein to that feeling of tender sympathy which the suffering of others evoked in him, and which he had till then been ashamed of, as of a weakness. And his pity for her, remorse at having wished for her death, and above all the joy of forgiving, in itself gave him not only relief from suffering, but inward peace such as he had never before experienced. Suddenly he felt that the very thing that had been a source of suffering to him had become a spiritual joy, and that what had seemed insoluble as long as he indulged in censure, recriminations, and hatred had become simple and clear when he forgave and loved. He forgave his wife and pitied her for her sufferings and remorse. He forgave Vronsky and pitied him, especially when reports of Vronsky's desperate action reached him. He pitied his son too, more than he had done before, and reproached himself for not having paid more attention to him. But for the newborn little girl he had a peculiar sentiment, not of pity alone, but even of tenderness. At first, commiseration alone drew his attention to the delicate infant, not his daughter, who had been neglected during her mother's illness, and would certainly have died then, had it not been for his solicitude. And he himself hardly knew how he grew fond of her. Several times a day he went to the nursery, and remained there so long that the nurses, who had been shy in his presence, became quite used to him. Sometimes he would sit for half an hour, gazing at the saffron and red, downy, wrinkled little face of the sleeping infant, watching the movements of the frowning little forehead and the plump little hands with the bent fingers and palms that rubbed the tiny eyes and nose. At such moments especially, Karenina felt quite calm and at peace with himself, seeing nothing exceptional in his position and nothing that ought to be altered. But as time went on, he saw more and more clearly that, however natural his position might appear to him at the time, he would not be allowed to remain in it. He was conscious that, beside the good spiritual force which governed his soul, there existed a coarse power, as potent if not more so, and that this power would not grant him the humble peace he desired. He felt that everybody looked at him with questioning surprise, without understanding him, expecting something from him. And especially, he was aware of the insecurity and artificiality of his relation to his wife. When the softened mood caused by the nearness of death had passed, Karenina began to notice that Anna feared him, was oppressed by his presence, and avoided looking him straight in the eyes. It was as if she wished, yet could not make up her mind, to say something, and foreseeing that their present relation could not continue, expected something from him too. At the end of February, Anna's newborn daughter, also named Anna, happened to fall ill. Karenina had been in the nursery that morning, and having given orders to send for the doctor, had gone to the department. Toward 4 o'clock, having finished his work, he returned home. On entering the ante-room, he saw there a handsome footman in gold-braided livery, with a bearskin cape, holding a cloak lined with white fur. "Who is here?" asked Karenina. "Princess Elizabeth Fedorovna Tverskaya," answered the footman with a smile, as it seemed to Karenina. All through that difficult time, Karenina noticed that all his worldly acquaintances, especially the women, displayed a particularly lively interest in him and his wife. He noticed in all these acquaintances a kind of joy, which they suppressed with difficulty, like the joy he had noticed in the lawyer's eyes, and again just now in the footman's. Everybody seemed elated, as if they were giving someone in marriage. When they met him, they inquired with scarcely hidden pleasure about Anna's health. The presence of Princess Tverskaya and the memories associated with her, coupled with the fact that he had never liked her, was unpleasant to Karenina, and he went straight to the nursery. In the front nursery, Sereja, lying with his chest on the table and his legs on a chair, was drawing something and chattering merrily. An English nursery governess, who since Anna's illness had replaced the French governess with the boy, sat doing some crochet work. She hurriedly rose, curtsied, and nudged Sereja. Karenin passed his hand over his son's hair, answered the governess's inquiry about Anna's health, and asked what the doctor had said about baby. "The doctor says there is no danger, and has ordered baths, sir." "But she's still suffering," remarked Karenin, listening to the crying child in the next room. "I think the nurse is unsuitable, sir," said the Englishwoman with decision. "Why do you think so?" he asked, stopping short. "The same thing happened in Countess Paul's case. The baby was medically treated, and then it turned out to be merely hungry and nothing more. The nurse has no milk, sir." Karenin reflected a moment and then entered the other room. The little girl lay with her head thrown back, wriggling in the wet nurse's arms, and would neither take the breast nor cease screaming, despite the hushing of two nurses who were bending over her. "Still no better?" asked Karenin. "Very restless," said the head nurse in a whisper. "Miss Edwards says that perhaps the nurse has no milk," he said. "I think so too, Alexis Alexandrovitch." "Then why did you not say so?" "Whom could I speak to? Anna Arkadyevna is still ill," said the old nurse in a dissatisfied tone. The nurse was an old family servant, and in her simple words Karenin thought he noticed a hint at his position. The baby screamed louder, catching her breath and growing hoarse. The old nurse, with a gesture of vexation, came up and took her from the wet nurse, and began pacing up and down, rocking the baby in her arms. "The doctor must be asked to examine the nurse," said Karenin. The healthy-looking wet nurse in her finery, evidently afraid of being dismissed, muttered something to herself as she covered her well-developed breast, and smiled contemptuously at the idea of her not having sufficient milk. In that smile, also, Karenin thought he saw himself in his position ridiculed. "Unfortunate child," said the nurse, hushing the baby and continuing to walk up and down with it. Karenin sat down on a chair, and with a look full of suffering and weariness, watched the nurse as she paced the room. When the child was pacified and laid in her deep cot, and the nurse, after smoothing the little pillow, went away, Karenin rose and, stepping with difficulty on tiptoe, approached the infant. For a moment he stood silent, regarding the child with the same weary expression. But suddenly a smile, wrinkling the skin on his forehead and making his hair move, lit up his face, and he quietly left the room. He rang the bell in the dining room and told the servant to send for the doctor once more. He was vexed with his wife for not troubling about the charming baby, felt disinclined to go in and see her while in that frame of mind, and also disinclined to meet the Princess Betsy. But his wife might think it strange if he did not come in as usual, and so he mastered himself and went to her bedroom. Stepping on the soft carpet, as he approached the door, he involuntarily overheard a conversation which he had not wished to hear. "If he had not been going away, I should understand your refusal, and his too. But your husband must be above that," Betsy was saying. "It is not for my husband's sake, but for my own, that I don't wish it." "Don't talk about it," answered Anna in an excited voice. "Yes, but you can't but wish to say goodbye to a man who tried to shoot himself for your sake." "It's just for that reason that I don't wish it." Karenin, with a frightened and guilty face, stopped short and thought of returning unnoticed. But coming to the conclusion that this would be undignified, he turned, coughed, and went toward the bedroom door. The voices were silent, and he entered. Anna, in a grey dressing gown, with her black hair cropped short, but already growing again like a thick brush over her round head, sat on a couch. As usual, when she saw her husband, all her animation vanished from her face. She bowed her head and glanced uneasily at Betsy. Betsy, dressed in the very latest fashion, her hat soaring high above her head, like a little chimney coronet over a lamp, in a dove-coloured dress with very pronounced diagonal stripes, going one way on the bodice and the other way on the skirt, was sitting beside Anna, her flat, tall figure very erect and her head bent. She met Karenina with an ironical smile. "Ah!" she exclaimed, as if in surprise. "I am so glad you are at home. I have not seen you since Anna's illness. I have heard everything, all about your attentiveness. Yes, you are a wonderful husband," she said, with a significant and affable expression, as if she were conferring on him an order of high-mindedness for his conduct toward his wife. Karenin bowed coldly, and kissing his wife's hand, asked about her health. "I think I'm better," she said, avoiding his eyes. "But your face looks feverish," said he, emphasizing the word feverish. "We've been talking too much," said Betsy. "I know it was selfish of me, and I'm going." She rose, but Anna, suddenly blushing, quickly seized her hand. "No, please stay. I must tell you, I mean," and she turned toward her husband, the colour spreading over her neck and forehead. "I don't wish to hide anything from you." Karenin cracked his fingers and bowed his head. "Betsy says Count Vronsky wanted to come and say goodbye, before leaving for Tashkent." She was not looking at her husband, and evidently was in a hurry to get through what she meant to say at any cost. "I said I could not receive him." "You said, my love, that it would depend on Alexis Alexandrovitch," Betsy corrected her. "Oh, no, I can't receive him, and it would lead—" She stopped suddenly and glanced inquiringly at her husband, who was not looking at her. "In a word, I don't wish—" Karenin drew nearer and was going to take her hand. Her first impulse was to draw away her hand from his moist one, with the thick swelling veins, that was seeking hers. But with evident effort she pressed it. "I am very grateful for your confidence, but—" he began in confusion, feeling with vexation that what he could so clearly decide within himself, he was unable to discuss in the presence of the Princess Tverskaya, who appeared to him the personification of that coarse power which would rule his life in the eye of the world, and which prevented him from yielding to his feelings of love and forgiveness. He stopped and looked at the princess. "Well, goodbye, my precious," said Betsy, rising again. She kissed Anna and went out. Karenin followed her. "Alexis Alexandrovitch, I know you to be a really high-minded man," said Betsy, stopping short in the little sitting room and once again pressing his hand with peculiar warmth. "I am only an outsider, but I am so fond of her and respect you so much that I will take the liberty of advising you. Receive him. Alexis Vronsky is honor personified, and besides, he's leaving for Tashkent." "Thanks for your sympathy and advice, Princess, but the question whom my wife will and whom she will not receive, she will decide for herself." He said this from force of habit, with a dignified raising of his eyebrows, but immediately remembered that whatever he might say, there could be no question of dignity in his position, and saw the confirmation of this in the suppressed, cruel, and ironical smile with which Betsy glanced at him when he had spoken. "20. Karenin took leave of Betsy when they reached the dining room, and returned to his wife. She was lying down, but on hearing his step she quickly sat up in her former place, and glanced at him with apprehension. He saw that she had been crying. "I am very grateful to you for your confidence," he repeated in Russian what he had said in French in Betsy's presence. When speaking Russian, he called her thou, and that always irritated her. "And I am very grateful for your decision. I too think that, as he is going away, there is no need whatever for Count Vronsky to come here. However—" "But I've already said so. Then why repeat it?" Anna suddenly interrupted him, with an irritation she could not repress. No need whatever, she thought, for a man to come and take leave of a woman he loves, for whose sake he wanted to die and has ruined himself. A woman who cannot live without him. No need whatever. and she pressed her lips together and lowered her glistening eyes, looking at his hands with their swollen veins, which he was slowly rubbing together. "Let us say no more about it," she added more calmly. "I left it to you to decide the matter, and I'm very glad to see," began Karenina. "That my wish coincides with yours," she rapidly completed his sentence, exasperated by the slowness with which he spoke, and knowing beforehand what he would say. He assented. "Yes, and Princess Tverskaya's intrusion into this most difficult family matter is entirely out of place, especially as she—" "I don't believe anything they say about her," Anna put in quickly. "I know that she is sincerely fond of me." Karenina sighed and paused. She was agitatedly toying with the tassels of her dressing gown, glancing at him with that tormenting feeling of physical repulsion for which she blamed herself, but which she could not overcome. The one thing she was longing for was to get rid of his obnoxious presence. "I've just sent for the doctor," said he. "I'm quite well. Why should I need the doctor?" "Yes, but the little one keeps screaming, and they say the nurse has not enough milk." "Then why would you not let me nurse her when I entreated you to? She is a child anyhow." He understood what she meant by that anyhow. "And they will kill her." She rang and ordered the baby to be brought. "I asked to be allowed to nurse her, and I wasn't, and now I'm blamed." "I don't blame—" "Yes, you are blaming me. Oh God, why did I not die?" And she began to sob. "Forgive me, I'm upset. I'm unjust," she went on, controlling herself. "But go." No, it can't go on like that, he told himself with conviction after leaving his wife. Never before had his impossible situation, as the world thought it, his wife's hatred, and the strength of that coarse power which, in direct opposition to his inward mood, dominated his life and demanded fulfillment of its decrees and a change in his relation to his wife. Never before had the impossibility of his position appeared so evident. He saw clearly that the world and also his wife were demanding something from him, but exactly what this something was, he did not comprehend. All this was arousing a feeling of animosity in his soul, spoiling his peace of mind, and depriving his achievement of all value. He considered it better for Anna to break off her relations with Vronsky. But if everyone thought this impossible, he was even ready to allow those relations to be renewed, so long as no slur was thereby cast on the children. He was not deprived of them, and his position was not altered. Bad as this would be, it would be preferable to a complete rupture, which would place her in a hopeless and shameful position, and deprive him of all he loved. But he felt powerless. He was aware in advance that everybody would be against him, and that he would not be allowed to do what now seemed so natural and good. That he would be obliged to do what was wrong, but what seemed to them necessary. "21. Before Betsy had passed out of the dining room, Oblonsky, who had just come from Eliziev's, where newly arrived oysters were to be had, met her in the doorway. "Aha, Princess! What a pleasure to meet you," he began. "And I've been at your house." "We meet only for a moment, as I am just going," said Betsy, smiling and putting on her glove. "Wait a little, Princess, before putting on your glove. Let me kiss your hand. There is nothing for which I am more thankful than for the revival of the old custom of hand-kissing." And he kissed Betsy's hand. "When shall I see you again?" "You are not worth it," said Betsy, smiling. "Yes, I am well worth it, because I have become the most serious of men. I not only settle my own, but other people's family affairs," said he with a significant glance. "Ah, I'm very glad," said Betsy, at once understanding that he referred to Anna. She returned to the dining room with him, and they stood together in a corner. "He will kill her," said Betsy in a significant whisper. "This is impossible, impossible." "I'm very glad you think so," returned Oblonsky, shaking his head with an expression of grave, woe-begone commiseration. That is why I've come to Petersburg." "The whole town is talking of it," she said. "It is an impossible situation. She is fading away, fading away. He does not understand that she is one of those women who cannot play with their feelings. One of two things must happen. Either he must take her away, acting energetically, or he must divorce her. But all this is stifling her." Yes, exactly," said Oblonsky, sighing. "I've come because of that. I mean, not entirely because of it. I've been made chamberlain and had to tender my thanks. But the chief thing is to get this affair settled." "Well then, may God help you," said Betsy. Having seen her down to the hall and again kissed her hand, a little above the glove, just where the pulse beat, and having told her some rubbish so daring that she did not know whether to be angry or to laugh, Oblonsky went to his sister's room. He found her in tears. Though he was overflowing with high spirits, Oblonsky immediately fell into a sympathetic and romantic mood suited to hers, inquired after her health, and asked how she had spent the morning. "Very, very badly. This afternoon and morning and all other days, past and future," she replied. "I think you give way to melancholy. You should rouse yourself and look life straight in the face. I know it is hard, but I've heard it said that women love men for their very faults," Anna began suddenly. "But I hate him for his virtues. I cannot live with him. Try and realize it. Even his looks have a physical effect on me and drive me beside myself. I cannot live with him. What am I to do? I was unhappy and thought it impossible to be more so, but I could never have imagined such a terrible position as I am now in. Will you believe it, knowing that he is a kind and generous man, that I am not worth his little finger? Nevertheless, I hate him. I hate him for his generosity, and there is nothing left for me but—" She was going to say death, but he did not let her finish. "You are ill and excited," said he. "Believe me, you are greatly exaggerating the case. There is nothing so very terrible about it." Oblonsky smiled. No one else in his place, having to do with such despair, would have permitted himself to smile, for his smile would have appeared callous. But in his smile there was so much kindness and almost feminine tenderness that it was not offensive, but soothing and pacifying. His soft, comforting words and smiles had as soothing and calming an effect as almond oil, and Anna soon felt this. "No, Stiva," said she, "I'm lost, quite lost, and even worse than lost. I'm not lost yet. I cannot say all is finished. On the contrary, I feel that all is not yet finished. I am like a tightly strung cord which must break. But all is not finished, and it will end in some dreadful manner. Ah, no, one can loosen the string gently. There is no situation from which there is no escape. I have been thinking and thinking. Only one." Again he understood from her frightened face that she considered death to be the only escape, and did not let her finish. "Not at all," he replied. "Listen, you can't see your position as I can. Let me tell you my frank opinion." Again he smiled his almond oil smile. "I will begin at the beginning. You married a man 20 years older than yourself. You married without love and without having known love. That was a mistake, I grant." "A dreadful mistake," said Anna. "But again I say that is an accomplished fact. Next, let us admit that you had the misfortune to fall in love. Not with your husband. That is a misfortune, but that too is an accomplished fact. Your husband has accepted that and forgiven you." He paused between each sentence, expecting her to make objections, but she made no answer. "That is so? Now comes the question. Can you go on living with your husband? Do you wish it? Does he wish it?" "I don't know at all." "But you yourself say you cannot endure him." "No, I did not say so. I take back those words. I know nothing, I understand nothing." "Yes, but let me—" "You can't understand. I feel that I am flying headlong over some precipice, but must not even try to save myself. And I can't." "Never mind, we'll spread out something to catch you. I understand that you cannot take it upon yourself to express your wishes and feelings. I have no wishes at all, except that everything were at an end. And he sees that and knows it. Do you think it weighs on him less than on you? You suffer and he suffers. What can come of that? Well, a divorce would solve the whole problem, said Oblonsky, not without difficulty expressing his main idea, and looking at her significantly. She replied only by shaking her cropped head. But by the expression of her face, suddenly illuminated with its old beauty, he saw that the only reason she did not wish for this solution was because it seemed to her an impossible happiness. I am dreadfully sorry for you both. How happy I should be if I could arrange it, continued Oblonsky, now smiling more boldly. Don't say a word. If only God helps me to say what I feel. I shall go to him. Anna looked at him with dreamy, shining eyes, but said nothing. 22. Oblonsky, with the same rather solemn expression with which he was wont to take the chair at council meetings, entered Karenin's study. Karenin, with his arms crossed behind him, was pacing up and down, meditating on the very subject that his wife and Oblonsky had been discussing. I am not disturbing you? Asked Oblonsky, experiencing at the sight of his brother-in-law a feeling of embarrassment quite unusual with him. To hide that embarrassment, he took out a cigarette case with a new kind of fastening, which he had only just bought, smelled the leather of which it was made, and took out a cigarette. No. Do you want anything? Karenin answered reluctantly. Yes. I must have a talk with you, said Oblonsky, surprised at his own unaccustomed timidity. That timidity was so unexpected and strange that Oblonsky could not believe it was his conscience telling him that what he was about to do was wrong. He made an effort and conquered it. I hope you believe in my affection for my sister, and my sincere attachment and respect for yourself, said he, flushing. Karenin stopped. He made no reply, but the expression of submissive self-sacrifice on his face struck Oblonsky. I intended to talk to you about my sister and your mutual position, said Oblonsky, still struggling with his unwonted timidity. Karenin smiled sadly, looked at his brother-in-law, and without replying went to the table and took from it an unfinished letter which he handed to him. I think about that subject incessantly, and this is what I have begun to write, as I think I can put it better in writing, and my presence is distasteful to her, he said, holding out the letter. Oblonsky took the letter, looked with perplexed amazement at the dull eyes fixed on him, and began reading. I see that my presence is distasteful to you. Hard as it was for me to assure myself of this, I see that it is so, and there is no help for it. I do not blame you, and God is my witness that when I saw you ill, I resolved with my whole soul to forget everything that had come between us and to begin a new life. I do not repent, and never shall repent of what I did, as my only desire was for your welfare, the welfare of your soul. But now I see that I have not succeeded. Tell me yourself what would give you real happiness and peace of mind. I submit myself entirely to your wishes and sense of justice. Oblonsky returned the letter, and went on looking at his brother-in-law with the same amazement, not knowing what to say. That silence was so disconcerting to both that Oblonsky's lips twitched painfully as he silently and fixedly gazed at Karenin's face. That is what I wanted to tell her, said Karenin as he turned away. Yes, said Oblonsky, tears choking him and preventing his reply. Yes, I understand you, he brought out at last. I must know what she wants, said Karenin. I am afraid she does not understand her position herself. She is no judge of it, replied Oblonsky, growing more composed. She is crushed, literally crushed by your generosity. If she reads this letter, she will not have the strength to say anything. She will only hang her head lower than ever. Yes, but under these circumstances, how is an explanation to be arrived at? How am I to find out what she wishes? If you will permit me to express my opinion, I think it is for you to say what you think should be done in order to put an end to this state of affairs." "Then you think that an end should be put to it?" Karenina interrupted him. "But how?" he added, moving his hands before his eyes in a manner unusual with him. "I don't see any possible way out." "There is a way out of every situation," said Oblonsky, rising and growing excited. "There was a time when you wished to break with her. Should you now be convinced that you cannot make each other mutually happy? Happiness can be defined so differently. However, I am ready to agree to anything. I want nothing at all. What way out is there, in our case?" "If you wish to know my opinion," said Oblonsky, with the same soothing, already tender smile with which he had addressed Anna. A kindly smile so convincing that Karenin, conscious of his own weakness and yielding to it, was involuntarily ready to believe anything Oblonsky should say. She would never say so, but there is one way out, one thing she might wish. It would be to terminate your relations and everything that reminds her of him. As I look at it, in your case it is necessary to clear up your newly arisen relation to one another. And this new relation can only be established when both are free. "Divorce," Karenin interrupted with disgust. "Yes, divorce, I think. Yes, divorce," Oblonsky answered, reddening. "That would be the most reasonable way, from every point of view, with a couple placed as you are. What is to be done if they found out that life together has become impossible, as might happen anywhere?" Karenin sighed heavily and closed his eyes. "There is only one thing to consider. Does either party wish to remarry? If not, it is very simple," went on Oblonsky, gradually overcoming his embarrassment. Karenin, his face drawn with distress, muttered something to himself and made no reply. He had considered 1,000 times all this which appeared so simple to Oblonsky, and it seemed to him not only far from simple, but altogether impossible. An action for divorce, with the details of which he was now acquainted, seemed impossible, because a feeling of self-respect and his regard for religion would not allow him to plead guilty to a fictitious act of adultery, and still less to allow the wife he had forgiven and whom he loved to be indicted and disgraced. For other and yet more important reasons also, divorce seemed out of the question. In case of a divorce, what would become of his son? To leave him with his mother was not possible. The divorced mother would have another, an illegitimate family, in which the position and education of a stepson would in all probability be a bad one. Should he keep him himself? He knew that would be revengeful, and he did not wish for revenge. But besides all this, what made divorce seem to Karenin more impossible than any other course was that by consenting to it, he would by that very act ruin Anna. What Dolly had said in Moscow, to the effect that in considering a divorce he was thinking of himself and not of Anna, who would then be irretrievably lost, had sunk into his heart. And having connected these words with his forgiveness and with his attachment to the children, he now understood them in his own way. To agree to a divorce, to give her freedom, would mean, as he looked at it, to deprive himself of the only thing that bound him to life, the children he loved, and to deprive her of the last support on the path of virtue, and cast her to perdition. As a divorced wife, she would form a union with Vronsky, which would be both illegal and criminal, because according to the law of the Church, a wife may not remarry as long as her husband is living. She will form a union with him, and within a year or two he will either abandon her or she will unite with someone else, thought Karenina. And I, by consenting to an illegal divorce, shall be the cause of her ruin. Hundreds of times he had thought it over, and had come to the conclusion that a divorce was not merely less simple than his brother-in-law considered it, but quite out of the question. He did not believe a word of what Oblonsky was saying, and for all his arguments had scores of refutations ready. Yet he listened, feeling that those words expressed that coarse and mighty power which overruled his life and to which he would have to submit. "The only question is, on what conditions you will agree to a divorce. She does not want anything, does not ask for anything, but leaves all to your generosity." Oh God, how have I deserved this?" thought Karenin, recalling the particulars of a divorce suit in which the husband took all the blame on himself. And with the same ashamed gesture with which Vronsky had covered his face, he hid his own in his hands. "You are upset, I quite understand, but if you consider, 'Whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if any man will take away thy coat, let him have thy cloak also,'" thought Karenin. "Yes, yes," he cried in a shrill voice, "I will take the disgrace, and even give up my son. But had we not better let it alone? However, do as you like." And turning away so that his brother-in-law should not see his face, he sat down on a chair by the window. It was very bitter, and he felt ashamed. Yet mixed with the bitterness and the shame, he felt a sense of joy and emotion at the greatness of his own humility. Oblonsky was touched. He remained silent for a while. "Alexis Alexandrovitch, believe me, she will esteem your generosity," said he. "But evidently it was God's will," he added, and having said it, felt how silly it was, and could hardly help smiling at his own stupidity. Karenin would have answered, but could not for his tears. "It is a fatal disaster and has to be faced. I regard this disaster as an accomplished fact, and am trying to help both you and her," Oblonsky went on. When he left his brother-in-law's room, Oblonsky was touched, but this feeling did not spoil his contentment at having successfully arranged the matter, for he was certain that Alexis Alexandrovitch would not go back on his word. To his contentment was added an idea that had just occurred to him. When the affair was all settled, he would ask his wife and intimate friends a riddle. "What is the difference between me and a chemist?" Answer: "A chemist makes solutions which do not make anyone happy, but I have made a dissolution and made 3 people happy." Or, "Why am I like a chemist? However, I will improve on it later," he said to himself with a smile.